Hello, environmental historians and environmental enthusiasts. Thank you so much for being here today to tune in to my audio analysis of the environment in artistic and medical accounts of the Dene or Navajo diabetes crisis. So where shall we begin today's analysis? In 2012, at 19 years old, Chantal Yazzie, a Navajo woman from the Navajo Reservation, a territory that covers over 27,000 square miles and stretches across 3 states, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, made headlines in alternative news sources like Indian Country. Why? For producing an art installation made from granulated sugar, the white sugar you might find in your kitchen cupboard. Yazzie's installation, titled The Sugar Project Modern Day Navajo Monster, informed viewers that overconsumption is killing the people. Which people? Members of the Navajo Reservation, that 27,000 square mile stretch. Yazzie selected her medium, sugar, to suggest at a symbolic level that sugar is overwhelming her people at a cellular level. To relay her message, Yazzie created human torsos topped with skeletal heads out of sugar. She used her finger to create X's in the place of the eyes and mouths and hearts of her figures. What was Yazzie's goal? To inform a general audience about the health risks of a sugar-laden diet, to foster a visual understanding of type 2 diabetes. Her art, or her public health initiative, depending on your perspective, spoke to an American health crisis. Type 2 diabetes has been labeled an epidemic in the United States. The very real need for an installation that targeted members of the Navajo Nation, however, is reflected by vital health statistics. Diabetes rates are highest in full-blooded Native Americans. What is particularly interesting about Yazzie's message, however, is its difference from research circulated, though not necessarily produced by, the National Institute of Health. This presentation will explore how Yazzie, a grassroots youth activist, presents diabetes, and how her vision of the Navajo environment differs from experts affiliated with the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, a part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. But first we must ask, what is type 2 diabetes? Simply put, type 2 diabetes refers to a blood sugar problem. To better understand this disease, I encourage you to think of type 2 diabetes by its other name, diabetes mellitus, or non-insulin dependent diabetes. So, how does non-insulin dependent diabetes work? When you eat foods that contain carbohydrates, it is broken down into glucose in the digestive system. Glucose is a type of sugar. This is what gives us energy. Glucose moves into the bloodstream, and the body senses blood sugar rising. In response to increased blood sugar levels, the pancreas starts to release insulin. Now, insulin is a hormone, and in our bodies, insulin functions like a key that can open cellular doors. Insulin allows glucose to get into the cells where it can be used for energy. In healthy bodies, blood sugar levels will begin to drop as insulin allows glucose into the cells. This does not happen for individuals with diabetes mellitus or non-insulin dependent diabetes. Their bodies have become desensitized to insulin, so insulin is unable to do its job properly. Because insulin cannot open these cellular doors, facilitating the conversion of glucose to energy, the body continues to send out the message, blood sugar rising. In response, the pancreas produces more insulin. So both the blood sugar and the insulin are rising in individuals with diabetes mellitus. Their cells, however, remain desperate for energy. And so their cells call upon the liver to release stored glucose. The blood sugar levels continue to rise, and so do the insulin levels. This is the vicious cycle of diabetes mellitus or non-insulin dependent diabetes. These are the internal workings, a very cursory glance, of type 2 diabetes. Symptoms include frequent urination, thrush or genital itching, the slow healing of wounds, blurred vision, and fatigue. According to the American Diabetes Association, diabetes was the 7th leading cause of death in the United States in 2010. Over 69,000 death certificates listed diabetes as the underlying cause of death. Approximately 230,000 death certificates listed diabetes as a contributing cause of death. The statistics released by the American Diabetes Association do not indicate which percentage of these death certificates belong to members of the Navajo Nation. So what does the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases suggest about this epidemic? Despite being a non-discriminatory disease, meaning that diabetes impacts the lives of all Americans, experts discussing the incidence of type 2 among the Navajo turn to genetics. This tendency is rooted in some of the earliest reports on diabetes in the United States. In 1982, the National Survey began collecting, consciously, consistently, data on diabetes. Over the next 10 years, some of the following conclusions were drawn. Quote, "It has been hypothesized that the high rates of diabetes for Native Americans are associated with a genetic predisposition to insulin resistance." End quote. Quote, "Apparent racial differences may reflect population differences in risk factors such as obesity, physical activities, and genetics." End quote. As early as 1991, journal titles made note of the thrifty genotype, a reference to the nomadic ancestral patterns of many indigenous groups. In more recent years, experts have melded a growing awareness of diabetes as a lifestyle disease with older arguments about biological predisposition. Diabetes mellitus is now defined as a genetics and/or lifestyle disease. In 2014, Yuri Alkim, a holistic nutritionist, suggested that arguments for genetic predisposition persisted in the United States. He critiqued American doctors for failing to teach their patients about what was happening inside their bodies, for de-emphasizing the lifestyle components of diabetes mellitus. What are the limitations of these genetic, race-conflated arguments? Genetic arguments are problematic because the disease becomes natural. Illness seems to be a predetermined outcome. The Navajo Nation is encoded for diabetes mellitus. Navajo bodies, their most intimate environments, are hazardous. By turning to a supposedly genetic predisposition, experts downplay external threats to cellular environments. Yazie's work downplays this intimate bodily environment. Instead, Yazie focuses her audience to turn their attention to changes in the Navajo Nation, particularly the introduction of processed foodstuffs. So how does Yazie identify Navajo risk factors? In her work, Yazie suggests that sugar, a monster, has been introduced to the Navajo Nation. This is not an internal threat. Monsters can be caught and slaughtered. Monsters can be caught and controlled. Monsters are frightening, but they are also manageable. In her work, it is the monster, sugar, not Navajo bodies, who wreaks havoc on the Navajo Nation. Viewers are not presented with a blood sugar problem, with a genetic predisposition, with a thrifty genotype. The problem of diabetes is not attached to a nomadic past that is hundreds, if not thousands, of years old. Instead, the monster is an observable phenomenon, as visible as the 200,000 plus death certificates in the United States. Yazie writes that the monster ate away their faces. It is the monster who gnawed away Navajo identity by putting mothers, fathers, grandmothers, and grandfathers to their graves. Where does this monster gather its strength? A 2014 study released by the Dene Policy Institute indicated that 63% of the 230 Navajo people surveyed received government food subsidies, like food stamps. 60% of the survey participants indicated a desire for healthy foods but could not access fresh produce on the reservation. Over half of the survey respondents said that they traveled between 150 to 200 miles round trip in search of fresh produce. The monster lives on the shelves of accessible gas stations and confectionaries. The monster enters the Navajo reservation on delivery trucks. Sugar is imported. The United States Department of Agriculture has since named the Navajo Nation a food desert. So what solution do these external environmental threats implied in Yazie's work allow? Yazie's monster empowers members of the Navajo Nation to reclaim their health by making alternative food choices. Yazie writes, quote, "We must stand and make a change. We must stand up and fight this monster," end quote. According to Yazie, fighting the monster requires traditional ecological knowledge. Navajo food, water, prayer, and tradition are all essential to healing. Yazie calls for a revival of subsistence economies. She calls upon the Navajo Nation to reclaim some control over food production. How is this message encoded in her art? Yazie's exhibit features images of Navajo youth cooking. According to anthropologist Charlotte Trispy, Navajo women prior to 1950, a turning point in the packaged food industry, collected wild plant seeds, fruits, roots, and nuts for kitchen use. Farm products included corn, beans, squash, and melons, which were processed by women for immediate use. Yazie calls for renewed knowledge of these local edibles. Yazie's exhibit also features images of youth carrying butchering knives. Now, one does not slice open a Snickers bar with a butcher knife. In these images, Yazie is hearkening back to a shepherding economy that was active prior to World War II. Prior to World War II, meat would be eaten fresh or dried for future consumption. This meat was harvested locally. And it wasn't just sheep that were eaten, but the Navajo Nation provided rats, packing wood, gophers, prairie dogs, and jackrabbits, which were trapped and then cleaned and cooked, according to Trispy's anthropological research. And the butchering knife is necessary to accessing and making use of these particular forms of lean protein. In Yazie's work, the youth have access to the tools necessary for healing. In some cases, these tools for healing exist in their grandparents' life's histories. It was the introduction of wage labor and the decline of subsistence living that increased health risks for babies born after World War II. With the conclusion of World War II, the threat of an altercation between the Soviets and Americans was imminent. As the Cold War loomed, the United States looked to improve national defense by increasing their nuclear weapons arsenal, which resulted in a high demand for uranium. In 1948, the United States Atomic Energy Commission established a standard price for uranium and agreed to purchase all of the uranium ore that was mined in the United States. Now, private mining companies attempted to capitalize on this opportunity by extracting uranium from the rich deposits found on Navajo reservations. By the 1950s, the newly developed uranium industry provided many Navajo with employment opportunities on their reservations. As employment in mining and national defense increased on the Navajo reservation, food purchases also increased, and subsistence farming decreased. As men went off to work, this harmonious family-based subsistence economy declined. This is the time Yazie's looking for solutions. She's looking to her grandparents' generation. So is the solution at hand? Yazie seems to suggest that the Navajo Nation has to start working for its health again. The value of one's hands to labor, to garden, to heal. is implied by the hairstyles featured by these sugar bodies. All of Yazi's sugar bodies wear their hair in a traditional bun. According to Navajo writer Jacqueline Keeler, the traditional bun is set after washing the hair with yucca root. Yucca root is gathered locally, it's locally harvested, and it's gathered by hand. The hair is then brushed with a bundle of stiff grass, again, collected locally, collected by hand. The hair is then wrapped in white sheep's wool that has been spun into yarn, again, calling to this local shepherding economy and, again, work that's done with the hands. Keeler suggests that the traditional bun is a reminder of, quote, the beautiful things we, the Navajo, create with our hands, end quote. The hairstyles featured in Yazi's art remind Navajo viewers to use their hands in the healing process. Youth are to reclaim responsibility for planting and harvesting with their hands. Youth are to reclaim responsibility for butchering with their hands. By taking a more hands-on role in their environment, Navajo youth can rebuild healthy, beautiful bodies. Now, does the National Institute of Health invest in a hands-on solution to health, to diabetes mellitus? The National Institute of Health and their affiliates emphasize the internal environment, the bodily environment, and places less emphasis upon Navajo food production. Less emphasis is placed on the ability of individuals to modify their external environment, to plant, to harvest, to butcher, to use one's hands to manage one's cellular functions. Instead, improving health is tied to an increase in expert monitoring of at-risk youth. Now, this is not to downplay the importance of preventative medicine. I simply want to highlight a gap in healing strategies. Experts call for, quote, public health programs that incorporate specific psychosocial and cultural adaptation for individual tribes, end quote. Navajo youth are not called upon to revitalize their harvesting tradition. The state has labeled the reservation a food desert. Instead, Navajo youth are encouraged to consume more Western health literature, to seek out and consume expert advice. And also, Navajo youth are called upon to consume alternative Western products. Instead of learning to butcher prairie dogs and jackrabbits, youth are encouraged to bake plain JBS chicken breasts instead of Swanson's fried chicken TV dinners. There is a call to seek healthier choices in the freezers of the food desert, but there is not a call to seek out the nutritional wealth of this arid landscape. How, if at all, does this matter to us as environmental historians? I believe this story draws attention to the critical importance of our research, about landscapes, about biodiversity, about conceptions of wild foods, and Navajo healing programs. It is also a reminder of the continued importance of environmental studies in complicating centuries-old race-based science, to battling race as a short word that naturalizes disease that is intimately connected to food systems and related landscape use. Thank you.